double dip into Acclaim, shall we? Last time out we looked at the fall of the company through one of its last series, the forever disappointing Legends of Wrestling. And in the midst of all that, there was a small shout out to their 16-bit, well, if not exactly glory days, then at least the days when they were successful and even produced a good game every so often. And this here's one of them. I suppose you could almost consider this a slight addendum to the old licensed game series in that it was a game that came very close to being covered properly back then, but ultimately just missed out. No big thrills or anything, just to look at a quite underrated and forgotten Mega Drive game that I happen to quite enjoy and that I think deserves a bit more love. And so here it is, Predator 2, published by Acclaim in 1992 and the first game developed by Teeny Weeny Games, who are probably most famous for the Discworld series. Predator 2 is one in a line of amusing curios that you only get with licensed games, in that the sequel, or the follow-up that nobody really gave a shit about, ended up getting the good game. See also Gremlins 2 The New Batch, Alien 3, Scooby and Scrappy Doo on the Amiga, and the Amiga version of Robocop 3. This is especially compounded if the original and loved movie or whatever got nothing but shit, which is certainly true of Predator. The original Predator got nothing except a cheap and rotten NES side-scroller and an almost deathly slow home computer one and gunner. They were both stinkers. The film Predator 2, released in 1990 is, well, an odd sequel that simply tries to sell itself on the premise. It's Predator, but now he's roaming around the streets of LA. It's not an awful movie by any means, supported as it is by a cast with Gary Busey and Danny Glover actually not being all that bad in his role that's a bit more conventional than Arnie's Ubermensch in the original and agreeably so, but it's let down by a lack of much in the way of action or suspense. The original Predator worked as well as it did by virtue of almost being like a horror movie where people, subversively in this case big strapping action men who were the face of blockbuster movies at the time, get picked off one by one like college dorm teenagers. And the sequel, well, doesn't really have any of that. And while most of the alien ship stuff at the end is gorgeous and quite intriguing, the movie is sure as hell asking a lot to have us believe that Danny frickin' Glover could take out a Predator in a straight fight when even Arnie himself couldn't do it. The Predator 2 game itself arrived quite a while after the film's release in mid-late 1992. Like the first movie, it wouldn't be the only one. There was a completely different Predator 2 game released for home computers that was little more than a basic light gun game, only without the light gun. Kinda dull. The Mega Drive game is what we're really interested in. A top-down shooter that also simulates an isometric point of view, trying to give you that feel of blasting your way through gangs in the streets of Los Angeles. The objective of each level is pretty straightforward. You shoot a bunch of gang members in order to clear a path to the hostages that are dotted throughout the level. The Predator is always observing your progress, and those tri-laser sights will always come into view as you get close to a hostage, tracking them, and if they make it to the hostage before you do, then said hostage gets whipped to fuck. And if you dawdle at the end of the level, those sights will start heading towards you. If you let too many hostages die, then you lose a life, so watch out. This all makes for a very fast-paced game indeed. As much as you want to shoot everything that moves, a lot of time in Predator 2 is actually spent dodging and trying to suppress fire, aside from the occasional boss fight here and there. It hasn't exactly been picked up by a lot of people, but I think it'd make for a pretty damn cool speedrun game. Now, this isn't the hardest game in the world or anything, although shit does get gradually tougher as you progress. Some of the boss fights in particular trap you in some tight areas, and there's always that tension of trying to get to the next flak jacket before another bullet hits you. The controls are pretty nice. You've always got an infinite ammo pistol which you can strafe with, and hoo boy does that come in handy, along with a secondary fire button for all the weapons that you've got. You can't strafe with these, which limits them a little, but a lot of them are bloody powerful, especially grenades and the rifle, which can take close to any boss down in just a few shots. There's also the option to use some of the Predator's own weapons, the spear, the net, and the flying discs. Perhaps one slightly disappointing thing is that when you actually fight with a Predator, they never really use that trademark tri-laser, or at least not in a way that makes it at all threatening. It's certainly a feature of the game, as previously mentioned, but the Predator's main weapon is always just in the background, and if I'm honest, it's usually pretty straightforward to avoid, either for yourself or the hostages. It's not particularly fast, it only moves in diagonals. It's yeah. The stages themselves progress in typical movie fashion. There's a couple of levels in the streets themselves, and you also get the rooftops, you know, where Harrigan had his first sighting of the Predator, the subway, where Harrigan has his first proper fight with one, at least in the game, the slaughterhouse, where Gary Busey and his team get hammered, and finally the alien ship. Faithful to the movie? Yes, sort of. It might seem weird for so many humans to be put to the sword, but then the second movie did take place in the midst of a citywide gang war, so it's justifiable in that sense. It's perhaps less justifiable that after you battle the final boss at the end, he doesn't even cark it. He just gives up and chucks the antique gun at you. Those licensed games and their weird changes to the plots of movies. Gotta love them. The action itself never really changes, only the backgrounds. The gang members that you shoot drop all kinds of drug paraphernalia which you can pick up for points, another potential distraction from the main goal, but it may be important if you need a bunch more lives for that alien ship. And trust me, you are going to need those lives for that ship. It's one of those games where the difficulty takes a big leap for the final level. Most of the game's levels are actually fairly small and straightforward to get through. If you naturally work through games at a fast pace, like I do, then this game is definitely for you as it accommodates that. The alien ship, however, is an absolutely huge maze, probably as big as every other level in the game put together, where you have to rescue tons of hostages, and the place is absolutely teeming with predators, including the final fight against the big predator who's tracked you throughout the game. You come to expect this sort of thing out of a Mega Drive game, particularly a licensed one, and, well, maybe it's not so much of a negative. I mean, it is, I guess, good for the game to actually have a bit of bite at this point, but damn, this level is very difficult indeed, and you're going to need to stock up on weapons and lives throughout the rest of the game to stand a chance. On the whole, Predator 2's design is straightforward but effective. There's a definite commitment towards keeping the action going, even if it's through railroading you with arrows pointing towards the nearest hostage. Thankfully, this isn't the sort of game where you're going to have to spend an age hunting for that last hostage. You'll always be moving in the right direction and there will always be something to shoot or avoid. Predator 2 on the whole was greeted as a typically average licensed game on release, and is not exactly regarded as a jewel in the system's library. Some parts of the press actually gave it quite a savaging, which is a bit of a shame, although I can think of a couple of reasons why. Firstly, it's not exactly much of a looker. The level in the slaughterhouse has a little bit of atmosphere, but most of the rest of the game is kind of bland in this department. Even the alien ship is a disappointment in this regard considering how it looked in the film, the mist serving as a poor substitute for, you know, an actual floor. There's also the music, which is an acquired taste. It's typical Western Mega Drive Gems driver fare, and a lot of the soundtrack, particularly the main Streets theme, is actually weirdly funky. I think the soundtrack's okay myself, even if there's nothing that really stands out about it, but again I can see why people would consider it boring and largely ill-fitted. And the game's simple play isn't exactly going to be satisfying for everyone. Make no mistake, this is quite a short game that you can pretty much breeze through in about half an hour flat once you know what you're doing, and completion would probably only take a couple of goes to boot. If you don't gel with the style, it's not going to be much of an experience. And geez, I mean, the ending. Quite literally, blink and you'll miss it. It's the you suffer by napalm death of video game endings. Add into that the general trappings and stereotypes that come with being a game based off a license, and you've got something that received pretty short shrift. Still, I enjoy it. I guess this game is just my sort of thing, really. It may not be the best game in the world, but it's exactly the sort of game that I would go to for a quick blast. If I ever need to play it for any reason, then usually I'll see it straight through to the finish. Hell, the main reason why this video even exists is because I wanted to capture a little bit, literally just a few seconds, of Predator 2 for my video on Legends of Wrestling, and I ended up playing it to the end. And it's nice to have the odd game like that, you know? And I can also happily say that so long as you discount any of the Predator games that have aliens attached to them, this is perhaps the greatest game ever made, or at least one of two, with the Predator license attached to it. Yay! Let's damn the whole thing with faint praise. In any case though, for me it's a cool little Mega Drive game that you can still pick up for very little money indeed, and you're not exactly going to lose out on much if you give it a try. It holds similar ground to the top-down shooter based on True Lies, and it's up to you really whether you prefer the methodical pace and larger levels of that game, or this one's fast and dirty action. And hey, as a little bonus, why don't we quickly look at the Master System version? It is very similar to the Mega Drive game, but if anything it's worth seeing how the game fares in 8-bit. This game might be fairly obscure to some people. Being a Master System title released in 1992, it only came out in the PAL territories. It is still largely the same game though. You roam the streets, kill baddies, and rescue the hostages before the Predator blasts them. But the perspective is slightly different. The game auto-scrolls to the side unless you're on the extreme left of the screen. Baddies in general take quite a few hits to kill, and they can be damn annoying. Some of them are very fast and they will swarm you if you're not careful, and you don't get any recovery time. On top of that, you get a whole bunch of snipers to deal with, and the Predator is a lot more aggressive. A lot of the time it will just target you instead of the hostages. On the whole, the game is a lot harder than the Mega Drive one. However, saying that, it's pretty fair with extra lives, and the difficulty, low-high, is consistent. There isn't the big final level difficulty spike that the Mega Drive game has, and you expect the last level to be incredibly difficult, and you're a bit more prepared for it as a result. And oh boy, it is difficult. It pretty much requires memorisation of the layout and a very slow, methodical pace. If you try and run through this game in the same way that you did the MD one, you'll basically be crushed. There's a lot of hard fights in this game, particularly the boss fights, and you're best off leaving nothing to chance. It did turn out to be quite a satisfying game to play and eventually beat though. On the whole, Predator 2 on the Master System is a very fine 8-bit port. I'd say it's at the very least just as good as the Mega Drive game, and it may well be preferable for quite a few people. I mean, honestly, in terms of being the greatest Predator game that doesn't feature any aliens at all, it might actually just edge this one out for me. It's damn good! Even the graphics surprisingly seem quite a bit more suited to the Master System. The streets are that little bit danker, the slaughterhouse looks fantastic, brilliant use of colour, looks much more like I remember it looking like in the movie, and the alien ship, well, it might not have any mist because, well, there was no fucking way that the Master System could ever produce any kind of mist, but the level looks a hell of a lot better for it. The ending's even better too, in that it's a bit more than 1 second long. Speaking of endings, well, I think it's time for this video to do the same. Now, don't go thinking that this is just a somewhat formless look at ancient mediocrity. Think of it as a nostalgic trip back to those games that at one point you might have rented and thought, well, hey, this is pretty okay actually. And if you're not satisfied with that, well, in the immortal if not quite fitting words of Harrigan from the movie, don't worry asshole, you'll get another chance. Bye!